Good morning and welcome to Wellbeing Wednesday. I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by Victoria Wright from the Living Herb. Victoria does tailor-made herbal health solutions, but I prefer her other description, which is it's like going to see a doctor on natural steroids. I love that. Victoria, welcome, and tell me a little bit more about that.
So I'm a medical herbalist and health coach, and when people come to see me, rather than getting the 8-minute slot that they would normally get with their GP, they come and see me for an hour. I work with people with chronic illness mostly, a lot of women's health particularly, and we spend an hour chatting about what's wrong. I do a health screening. We talk about diet, lifestyle, anything else that can affect our health, and then I put together a personally tailored medicine for the individual.
Cool. So when you say you do a health screening, obviously a lot of that has been online at the moment, is that right?
Yeah.
So what kind of information would you want from somebody to help sort of deal with their issues?
So what sort of information? Well, it depends. So from the health screening point of view, it's, a standard set of questions, talking about everything from whether or not somebody gets pins and needles in their hands and feet, through to talking about poo. As a herbalist, we really love talking about poo.
Lovely.
And then if we're talking about, what's going on for somebody at the moment and the reasons why they've come to see me, then that can be anything from how it started, how it's progressed, when it started, what was happening when it started, because often life events can influence how our health's affected. So it can be, a range of different questions.
Okay. And we were talking earlier on about burnout. Is this one of the things that people are coming to see you about sort of increasingly?
I think it's a thing that's coming around increasingly at the moment. So, I've worked with a lot of people with stress and insomnia over the last year, because that's been a big thing. Obviously stress affects our sleep. So that's been a major issue that seems to be happening. But I think in the last couple of weeks or so, things have turned around a little bit. So people are feeling stressed and anxious about going out into the world. And actually, they're also running on empty. We've been in this chronic stress situation for over a year now, and people are still working normally and trying to look after children and elderly relatives and, who knows what else, as well as coping with the personal impacts of what's been happening.
So things like burnout, anxiety, stress, you treat the physical side of it as well as the mental side, is that right?
Yeah. I think you have to deal with both.
Absolutely.
So there's some really great herbs that you can use for these. There's a great group of herbs called adaptogens. So things like ginseng, which you may have heard of, is part of this group of adaptogens, but there are many others. And they're really nice herbs because what they do is they help the body cope with the physical sides of stress. So there's something called the HPA axis, which stands for hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal. And these are different glands in the body that are, if you like, that's the hormone control center in the body. And if you can imagine when you're feeling stressed out, or when you're in a long period of stress and you're approaching burnout, if you imagine the HPA axis as a line and it suddenly goes off kilter, and that could be for, different hormone levels are being produced. So for instance, when we're stressed out, it's, the stress hormones like adrenaline get overproduced. And what these adaptogens do is they help, if you like, straighten up that axis. So they help you cope better with stress from a physiological point of view. But that gives you then the ability to start putting in all those healthcare routines and those self-care things in place.
I was reading a book last night and they were talking about antidepressants and how antidepressants don't cure depression. No. But they just give you, like, they rebalance some chemicals to help you cope with actually fixing yourself. So it kind of sounds like to me as a layman, it kind of sounds like this is almost the herbal version of something along those lines. Am I?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, they work in different ways to antidepressants. There are some herbs that work in the same sort of ways as antidepressants. What these are doing is they're working on the adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands are the bit that are producing the stress hormones. So they're working on different hormones, as opposed to antidepressants, which work more in the brain.
Yeah.
So you can be in a situation where actually physiologically what you're doing is helping your body cope, and then, you know, like you've said, you can then start doing things that will help to change your situation and your environment, because you feel more able to do that.
It never ceases to amaze me how mental health issues and physical health issues, in my head, they're completely on the same spectrum. I mean, if I had a broken arm, I would take painkillers, so that would help me on a day-to-day basis while my arm was healing. And so all these little things just kind of fall into line for me.
Yeah, I think we don't really understand how our mental health and our physical health are related, but we know that they are. You know, so for example, you know, menopause is a really interesting example, because there is a physiological thing that's happening to produce symptoms of menopause. But actually, if we're stressed out, if we're run down, if we're tired, that makes those symptoms worse.
Oh, I know that, I can tell you.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just one example, but any kind of chronic illness, you know, you have that, you know, if you're in pain every single day, for instance, that gets you down, you know, that's normal. But the problem is that when you feel down, the pain gets worse. And so you end up in a downward spiral. And what I think any health intervention tries to do is to break that cycle, so that you can feel more in control of it, and that you can start taking positive actions yourself to really help yourself.
One last thing that I want to ask you, and I know that you do like tailored medications, but one of the things that I'm hearing a lot at the moment as well is people having trouble sleeping. And I know there's kind of like loads of teas and herbs and all kinds of things that people talk about. So as an absolute expert in this field, just as a general, what kind of thing would you suggest as kind of like a bedtime drink maybe, for people that are having trouble sleeping? I mean, this is personally, I want to get my mum off the coffee. What can I say? So this is really going to help me too.
So one of the simplest things and the most easily available actually is chamomile. I think it's such an underrated herb, because we don't think of it as being, you know, a medicinal herb. It's just a nice tea that you can drink. But actually, it's a nervous system relaxant, so it calms you down. It's also a muscle relaxant, so it helps calm all the muscles as well. Great if you've got digestive problems too. So it's a very calming herb, and that makes it a great drink for sleep.
Excellent, thank you. And guess who's going to be popping out in a minute to get a couple of boxes of chamomile tea? Victoria, absolute pleasure, and thank you so much. And we're going to put something in the comments with some links so that people can kind of have a look at your website and check out what you do. And thank you very much for all your advice.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Have a lovely day.
Bye.